Hello and welcome to The Ripple Impact, the podcast where we dive into those fascinating, unexpected ripples that change everything. Today, I am delighted to be joined by someone whose story truly embodies the ripple impact in motion, Nick Graham. Nick is a global insight leader with an extraordinary journey shaped by bold leaps, hidden mentors, and a few pivotal moments that led to his pathway forward. From early inklings of self-discovery to reshaping brands and teams around the world, Nick brings both head and heart to every move he makes. Nick, I'm so delighted to welcome you to the show today. It's an absolute pleasure to have you here.
Thank you. Good to see you again. It's been, I'd say it's been too long, but it feels like we saw each other fairly recently. But
I know, and the beauty of LinkedIn, right, and social media, I feel like we see each other all the time, which is lovely. It's wonderful to have you on the show. Thank you for joining us.
Great, thank you.
So, Nick, for our listeners, would you mind giving us a little insight into your career today?
Yeah, of course. So I started my career in advertising planning back 25-ish years ago and really enjoyed advertising for a while and then realized that there had to be more to life than just the advertising. I really liked the planning bit. The advertising bit was I always sort of felt like you were a hammer in search of a nail, like whatever it was, the answer was advertising. So I drifted from there into brand innovation strategy, which I did for probably 10 years or so. And that's what took me to the US in 2010. Not long after that, I switched from the agency consulting side to the corporate side, and I moved to PepsiCo, which is where we had the pleasure of working together back in the day, where I led global teams and the US Insights team, all total for 8-9 years. And then in 21, in the middle of the pandemic, at a time when I thought, it's a great time to move and change jobs, especially when you can't see anybody in person, I moved to Mondelez to head up the global insights and analytics function, which I did for 3.5 years before I decided to do a complete change. And I quit my job. I quit the country because I'd been in the US 15 years and we moved back to Portugal and we're building a house here. So we changed everything except my husband and my dog. They were the only constants in that equation. Yeah, we kept them for now.
Wow, that's quite a change in such a short amount of time to do everything all in one go.
Amazing. Yeah, no, it was a lot. It was a lot. And now I'm using my experience of the last 25 years of agency and corporate life. I'm helping other insights teams, primarily client-side insights teams, some agency teams as well, work out how to help accelerate their transformation, how to create more impact in organizations, sharing some of the lessons and experiences, the good and the bad of my experience, and helping other teams accelerate their impact.
Lucky them. I remember I joined PepsiCo and announced it on LinkedIn. And my very good friend, an ex-colleague, Claire, who you know, said to me, "Oh, you have to get in contact with Nick Graham. He's fantastic. You'll love him. You must contact Nick. He's amazing." And I did, and she wasn't wrong. So,
oh, that's very sweet. I always like low expectations, though. I always like low bar, and then I can maybe over deliver on that.
Oh, well, you certainly did. You've been part of my career, yeah. Wow, so it's wonderful to have you here.
It's been great. It's really nice when you work with somebody like you, and you form sort of like an instant connection, and that follows through from career to career. So it's great to be talking to you again today. And it's exciting today. I'm really looking forward to this podcast because unlike a lot of podcasts I do, which are more truly work oriented, I'm excited today we'll talk about some personal stuff, some work stuff, and maybe work stuff in a bit of a different way from normal. So I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, well, thank you. What we love is human stories, right? You and I have been in insights for decades. And that part of the job has always been something that I'm so deeply passionate about. And that passion is now going beyond insights into other people's stories and the impact that they've had on organizations and culture and people. People always underestimate the impact that they have on other people. So hearing other people's stories, I always find really inspiring. So this is exactly why I'm doing it. So thank you. We've known each other for, 15 years maybe. Can you wind us back to those early moments that have really shaped you and those ripple impact moments and the people that have really shaped your life? I love hearing the stories of where it all began.
Yeah, I'm really lucky that I've had some incredible intentional and unintentional mentors over time. Some I've asked for, some I haven't, who've just been kind and generous. Sometimes people who didn't even know they were making an impact at the time, but made a huge impact on me. If we zoom back, I think one thing that really sticks in my mind was I grew up in a small town in North Yorkshire in the 80s and 90s. I sort of knew probably when I was about 14, 15 that I was gay. but I didn't really know what that meant. And what I really knew is I wasn't going to talk about it because I didn't feel particularly comfortable, certainly in the community I was. Everybody knew everybody and everybody knew everything. And so I knew the minute I told anybody, it would be halfway around the town. And I just didn't feel comfortable even thinking about it, never mind talking about it, to be honest. And I remember we were in a German class. I did French and German through A level. I carried them both on through 18. And there was a section in a book that we were reading about a gay character. I think the book was from the 40s or the 50s. And I just remember my German teacher at the time, Mr. Fife, said, he sort of took a moment, there was some giggling in the class or something when this character came up. And I just remember, in all seriousness, I remember he had wore glasses, just took his glasses off. And he made this impassioned speech about the importance of diversity, the importance of tolerance, and understanding that there are lots of different lifestyles, there are lots of different types of people out there. And it's not funny, right? This is the reality. And he said, there'll be people in this room, maybe gay, they may be straight, there may be people in this room who have different perspectives, come from different backgrounds. And he said, this isn't funny, you need to accept people. And I don't think at the time that he knew that I'm certain at the time he didn't know that I was gay, but it felt like one of those moments when it's funny, I didn't feel scared by it, and I didn't feel like he was singling me out, but I felt seen and heard for the first moment. For it was the first time, thankfully not the last time in my life and my career, when somebody actually unintentionally made me feel accepted, made me feel included, right, as part of the discussion.
Yeah.
I just remember had such a profound impact. And I guess I was probably 15, I guess, at the time. And it was one of the things, I mean, there were a number of other things, but it was one of the things that gave me the confidence to come out a little bit later after that, because it wasn't so much even about him, about my teacher, but it was more about, it gave me the confidence of thinking there are people out there who will accept you. This is a kind of a safe, inclusive environment. I knew there was at least one person, right, out there that I could go and talk to if I needed to about it. And I still think about it at this very, maybe unintentionally profound moment of feeling accepted, right? Feeling accepted, feeling seen and heard. I've realized through my career as well, how standing up and being proud of who you are isn't just a role model for your community, right? Whether you're a woman, whether you're a gay man, whether you come from a different ethnic background, whatever it isn't just a role model for you and your community and where you come from, but it's a role model for anyone, right, who doesn't feel that they quite fit in, to know this is an environment where it's safe to be quote unquote different, right? It's safe to be a little bit different from the quote unquote norm. I think that moment has struck me at the time, but has sort of stuck with me throughout my life as this bright light of realization about the importance of role modeling acceptance and role modeling inclusivity.
I mean, it's just, I've actually had the pleasure of this story before, and even you telling it again, it gives me just such goosebumps, and it genuinely makes me a bit teary, like
me too.
It really does. Like, the impact, oh gosh, the impact, I think as well, because my mom and my brother are both teachers, and my sister-in-law and friends are teachers, and my nephew's called Five, and I didn't realize he was called Mr. Five. And it's just like the impact that a teacher can have on someone is just so profound and so powerful. And to create such a sense of safety and belonging and comfort in that moment. Right. And he may have, I mean, did you ever tell him, did he even realize the impact that conversation had on him?
So I told him, I told him probably a little bit later when I was 17 or 18. I'm not sure, though, I ever actually told him about that moment. Yeah, I don't think I ever did. I don't even know, unfortunately, even if he's still around, to say thank you for that. And I'm not even sure if he would even really remember that moment. It's funny, again, how, and I've seen this later, you'll have people you've worked with, right? People who've worked for you, people you've known, and they'll come up to you and say, that thing you said in that meeting that day, or the way you behaved, had a huge, profound impact. And you're like, God, I can barely even remember the thing that you're talking about. But it just sort of makes you realize what a huge footprint, these are teachers in particular, my dad was a teacher as well, what a huge footprint anybody in that role can play, and how big or small things can make such a, usually hopefully a positive, but can make such a huge impact on people around them. in terms of creating the right environment, setting the right expectation environment that you're working in or operating in.
Yeah, and creating that sense of psychological safety. I mean, it wasn't even talked
Totally.
about in the 90s
No,
when this
no.
was happening. Yeah, I mean, words can have such a profound impact on people and such a positive impact on people. And the fact that when we first had our conversation and we had a very off the cuff conversation, it was the first story you told me. And it has stuck with you since those
Yeah.
German classes. And wow, like just wow. And,
Yeah.
as a leader, it's creating that sense of psychological safety for our teams as well, isn't it?
Exactly. And it's interesting because as I thought a lot about the moments that are ripple impact moments, I guess I hadn't really thought about how many of them relate to psychological safety. This one being obviously such a clear example,
Yeah.
when I was a 15-year-old school kid struggling with coming out. But as I thought about a lot of those other lighthouse moments a little bit later on in my career, a lot of them have to do with psychological safety. And again, it's not even a phrase that people, well, obviously they use it in psychology, but I feel like nobody really used it in corporate world until the last few years. But it's one of those things that I suddenly realized as I was thinking about this podcast. It really made me reflect on how many of those moments stand out for me in my life and my career. And I hope I've done a little bit of creating that in return, or paying that forward for my teams and those that have worked with me.
You certainly have, though, because you said earlier very kindly, we had a connection and we got on really well straight away. And
Yeah.
that's psychological safety as well with peers, that you
Yeah.
could meet someone and within a few minutes you feel safe, you feel welcomed, you feel
Yeah.
that you have permission to have a voice, have an opinion, to be authentically you. And we were working directly together, but you did that for me, and hopefully I did the same for you. The
Absolutely.
impact
Yeah.
that people have in organizations is huge, and especially when you're leading the teams. But I can say that you definitely done that, because you had
Thank
that
you.
impact on me.
It's interesting, a few times during my career, I had somebody reached out a while ago because when I was still at Mondelez, I did a post about being an openly gay leader and some of the challenges and some of the struggles I've had. Feeling sometimes accepted. I've never faced any harassment or anything overtly negative, but certainly throughout my career, I've faced moments when I wasn't sure whether I should be totally open, didn't know whether I should say boyfriend or husband or just leave it, gender neutral. A great friend of mine said being gay at work is often like, or sort of coming out at work is not an event, it's a continuous process. It's the story of your life. Like every time you meet somebody, you're like, oh yes, my husband, you're like, so I'm coming out again, I'm having to go through that. It's much easier, with age, but also over time, it's become a lot easier. It's still a conscious thing. Sometimes you have to think about. All of that to say, I was telling this story in a panel discussion and in a post, and I had somebody reach out, not a member of the LGBTQ community, but just said, actually, your experience mirrors how she felt, right? She was actually coming from a different ethnic background, but she said, although she hadn't had my experience, a lot of what I was talking about, she said, is how I feel in a way, like how I show up, things that I feel I have to hold back on. And it was just really interesting to hear it from her. And she said, you made me feel safe, even though you were talking about a community that I'm not necessarily part of. You made me feel safe because you made it clear that we all experience a version of this and we should all feel included and part of this. It doesn't really matter where you're starting from.
Yeah, amazing. And that idea of diversity in all shapes and sizes and forms, and cognitive diversity as well. People's opinions. You can be in a room of familiar faces and similar situations, but don't even always feel like you have a voice. And to be able to have a voice is so important and so critical. Sometimes psychological safety is about just turning up to work and being you and being present, having an opinion and getting involved and leaning in and being part of the conversation.
Yeah, and not feeling judged for that. Not feeling you can show up and have a conversation, have a point of view, and maybe don't know everything. People might have a different opinion, but people should still be respectful. They should still ask for your opinion. They should still be respectful of your opinion. They may disagree, but that's okay. We've got to create that safety for people to venture an opinion, because otherwise we never hear the divergent opinions. I was actually just watching the documentary about the Titan submarine and all of the whistleblowers who kept saying, this thing is not safe. This thing is not safe.
I've not watched it yet. I must watch it.
It's definitely a good watch. But I think it's a really interesting example, and we've seen bits of it probably through our career, where people have a different opinion and not heard and not listened to because it doesn't fit the narrative that people want, or because people are, oh yes, they're just being naysayers. Well, whoever they are and whatever that opinion is deserves an airing and deserves interrogation. you and I were dealing with food and drinks. It's hardly going to be a crisis, hopefully, in most cases, but we should certainly be heard and listened to.
You say that though, but you always hear these stories, don't you, of a small voice or a junior voice in, I don't know, it can be anything, even if you're in food and beverage, right, in manufacturing capacity, of a voice not being heard and there's an accident in the factory plant, but you can still have a really profound impact on people negatively and positively if you're not listened to and if you're not allowing those voices to come through.
Correct. Yeah. And I was going to build on your point and say, having coached and mentored quite a few different people from different backgrounds, I think one of the things I'm trying to encourage them, don't be afraid to ask good questions, because sometimes it's a naive question and that's fine. And again, in every environment, there should be space for you to answer a naive question, because how the hell did any of us learn except by asking questions? But also because sometimes the naive question isn't a naive question. Yeah. It's actually the question that everybody has. I remember it was early on in Mondelez, and when you join any new company and you have no idea what any of the terminology means.
Yeah, all the jargon.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I remember asking, exactly, the acronym. And I remember asking about an acronym, and everybody sat there and was like, actually, I don't know what it means either. And you're like, oh, actually, maybe people, sometimes when you ask a question, which you think is the naive starter question, in fact, the reality is other people don't know the answer to that either.
Yeah, it's true. And also often when you'll see it in meetings where someone asks a question, they're brave enough to stick their hand up and say, can I just ask? And you can always tell they're a bit nervous with the way they frame it. And then invariably what happens is then 2 other people or 3 other people go, oh yeah, I had the same. Yeah, can I just... Right. And then people lean in, don't they? And go, I had that too. So it sometimes just takes that bravery, doesn't it, to step forward. And you've talked before about having great bosses that have allowed you to do that. And you mentioned your boss doing that for you in your early days.
This was at Pepsi, my first job at Pepsi in the Global Beverages Insights team. And Deb Benovitz, who I still talk to now, I'm pretty sure I have told her this. Well, I'm sure she remembers this story. It was my first corporate job after 15 years in agency side. And I was a bit overwhelmed. I came in and the first day they were like, oh, we need you to look at all these things and give your opinion on this. And it was like the opposite of what we talked about. I don't have any idea what you're talking about. And you're asking me to weigh in on methodological questions that I totally don't feel equipped to answer. But I remember early on I was feeling like totally out of my depth and a bit of imposter syndrome, which always creeps in, right? Particularly when you start a new job and you're always like, oh God, they're going to find out any minute now that I have no idea what I'm talking about. Exactly. What have they done? And I remember talking to Deb about it because she was trying to say to me, look, you need to feel it's okay to step up and voice your opinion in meeting. You're a senior director, you're the same level as some of these other people in this room, and yet they're voicing their opinion. Step up and say what you think. And I was like, oh, but what if I'm wrong? What if they say, well, I'll go and talk to Deb and see what she thinks, because basically to kind of go over the top of you. And she said, well, whatever you say, and whatever their response is, you always say, Deb agrees with me. And I was like, well, but what if you don't? She went, don't worry, I always will. We might have a conversation offline about maybe there's a slightly different take I would have on it. But she said, you got to know going to that meeting, she said, I trust you. And I'm 100% sure that whatever you're going to say, even if I don't fully agree with it, she said, I'm 100% sure that it's all the right intent. So she said, you go in and you say, you need to know that I have your back, that I give you air cover. And if anybody tries to play that hierarchy card of, well, I'll go and talk to Deb, she said, you play it right back and go, well, I've talked to Deb and she agrees with me. And basically you need to trust me to move forward. And I remember thinking, wow, I've had a few bosses in my career who've done that, but she was probably the most direct that I've ever had. That she was just like, nope, you basically use me to say to other people to give you that air cover to move forward. I remember feeling so incredibly a little bit terrified by the responsibility that came with that, but I think feeling really empowered that somebody really believed in me that strongly, right? That they were willing to say that she agreed with me, basically, whatever it was I was going to say. Now, I can't say I used it that often, but it was a big psychological difference for me. Back to the psychological safety, it's sort of a different type of psychological safety, that sort of air cover safety of knowing going into the meeting, of feeling her support and her backup was a huge piece. It's definitely consciously something I've thought about ever since, in every job that I've done since then. When I've talked to my team, I've always focused on, where do you need air cover? Where do you need me to help you? It's the servant leadership model, which was one of the models we were taught at PepsiCo that so strongly resonated with me, which is that a leader isn't there necessarily at the top of the pyramid. You can also think about it the other way around, which is they're there to be the support for the team, and that their job isn't just you're not there to command, you're there to give direction and to shape. And I think you're just as much there to help support and to provide the cover for the team to actually move forward and to get the roadblocks out of the way, right? So I think that's just as important. Even though we learnt that in a training session, Deb's action that day was probably the most powerful example of it. How can I help you by getting rid of a roadblock that gets in your way? And how can I give you that air cover and that support?
That's incredible. And as you said, you may not have used it that often, if ever, but you knew you had it in your back pocket. So you always felt that you had that cover. I love that analogy. But also the empowerment to know I've got support here, I've got a backer here, I can have opinion, I can just go in free and not have to worry and think. So taking that pressure off you to allow you to have opinions is so beautiful. I love the air cover analogy. I always talk about the umbrella, how the boss helps protect you from stuff that's raining from down that you may not need. Some of it's important, right? And you need to know about. A lot of stuff happens that I think actually you've got a duty of care to protect your team from and allow them to focus, allow them to prioritize, allow them to do the job that they need to deliver without all this stuff being thrown at them. So there's definite role of air cover in a manager. And what an incredible thought of her words having a ripple impact on you, and then you passing that on to your teams as well.
Right, and I think that's one where as you said, the ripple impact, I felt the stone hit the water at that point. And even at that point, I could feel the profound effect on me. And I knew in that moment that this was a leadership behavior that was definitely something that I wanted to make part of my leadership DNA. And sad to say that often my leadership takeaways have come from things that I've seen that I don't like. Right? I've seen behaviors in leaders that I'm like, I don't want to behave like that. But Deb and luckily a few other great leaders that I've had, there are moments like that. You're like, yes, this is a perfect encapsulation of the leader that I want to be. And as you say, I'm going to throw that stone forward to my next job, to my next team.
Yeah, it's incredibly powerful. I've got someone who's joining the podcast, and I won't reveal too much more now. I'll reveal it when it happens. But she was, I think she might have been my boss's boss when I was at Coca-Cola. And I remember she was stood on the stage and presenting at this conference. And I was like, I want to be a little bit like that. Like I want a little bit of that. Like I want to emulate that. And I remember she just had such presence and such conviction. And I was like, I want that. It's amazing to think how much these words can have such an powerful impact on you, and then how you give that to the rest of your teams, and then that gets passed on. And I'm sure you've said the same to your team members, and then they'll go and pass it on to other people. Like how incredible is that?
Yeah, I certainly hope so. I certainly hope so that as you say, pass forward those role model characteristics that you hope will then pass on to other team members as well. In my first job at Pepsi, later on, when I was a bit more mature, and I had one of my teams said to me, because we were just talking about a problem that she was dealing with. I remember her saying, you're so unlike some of the other corporate leaders, because she said, it's weird to say this, but she said, it's like talking to a human being. Like, you talk back to me like a human being. Like, she said, even if there's something you know you should say, you caveat it with, this is what I have to say, but this is my perspective on it. And from Deb, from my boss Richard, when I was second or third job that I had at Clear, people like that I've learned. You said this about your boss's boss from Coca-Cola. One of the things that I've tried to learn is how to be, sounds so generic these days, so cliche, but how to be a human leader and show up like a human being. When I've had to let people go, or when I've left jobs, I've been emotional, and that is just who I am, right? And I've not been afraid of showing that. Or when I've got difficult news to share, it's difficult, and people can see that, right? You know, when I think something's BS, I've said, look, I'm not officially allowed to say this, but I think this is BS, because I just think you shouldn't divorce those two sides of yourself. A lot of leaders who struggle at points are part of the reason, not to say I haven't struggled as well for different reasons, but it's when you try and divorce the human self from the corporate self. In Deb's example that day, that ripple moment was a great example of just being human. Just being human, and being a human yourself, and treating your team like other human beings. And this is what they need to hear right now in order to be successful.
And you say it sounds so simple, but I don't think it always is, because
no, I don't think so.
Sometimes in organizations, there isn't almost that permissions and license and space to be vulnerable and to show the human side of you. And you were mentioning before about how you call it out when it's BS. And I've got examples where in my past, some things happened and I've said, look, the corporate position is this, and this is what we're doing. But I would also like to add my Laura opinion.
Yeah.
Because it's important that people understand you and where you're coming from and your position, and you allow those moments of vulnerability and honesty and sharing, because that's where you build bonds and connection. Being human and being vulnerable is so powerful, and I don't think it's often allowed to be present.
Yeah, completely. We saw this a couple of weeks ago with the UK Chancellor of the Exchequer having an emotional day. We don't really know what caused it, but then why this should be headline news because somebody's having a bad day and felt emotional. I mean, God, it's the 21st century after all.
Yeah, I said it. I posted a very strongly worded on LinkedIn about, someone put a comment on about it, and I put a very strong opinion out there because it just baffles me that the media responds to this woman having this vulnerable moment. We should be protecting her, not diving on top of the situation and holding it up as somebody's incapable.
Right. I mean, it's a classic example of still a huge bias that people have. So a man cries and he's vulnerable and authentic. A woman cries out, "Oh no, what does that?"
It's unhinged.
I mean, totally insane reaction. To your point, still shows that vulnerability and authenticity are not common practice still in a lot of corporate roles, which is why through lots of moments in my career, those moments that stand out often are where somebody's just very human and very authentic and cuts through all of the BS, and you're like, wow, yes, this suddenly feels like I'm having a conversation or a mentorship or whatever it might be with a real human being who really sees me and sees what I need in this moment.
And wouldn't it be amazing if we could all just be free to be ourselves and be our full authentic self? When people are allowed to be in those spaces, that they bring so much more because they're not worrying about everything else. And you talked about your boss getting rid of the blockers and getting things out of the way so you can turn up to the meeting and be present and listen and engage and bring an opinion. How incredible would everyone be even more if all of that could be taken off people's shoulders? And you can do that through license, permission, and environments. And it doesn't happen anywhere near enough.
Right, and real-time coaching and feedback. I think one of the things that I still don't see teams doing as much, I've been lucky a few points in my career. My boss, Richard at Clear, was great at this, which is in the meeting, he was super supportive. Afterwards, always within 24 hours, he would come back to me and he'd say, by the way, I want to give you some positive feedback, but I also wanted to give you some things that you need to work on. And it was so helpful. He didn't wait for the mid-year review. He was like, in the moment, you did a great job at this. Here's a few things that you need to work on for next time. And I never saw it as criticism because actually it was always helpful. It wasn't like you did a crappy job. It was like, this is the thing you need to work on. Here's what I suggest you go and do in order to work on your presentation skills or your commercial acumen or whatever it might be. It was always super leaning forward to what you go and do about it. He was always very good in the moment, in the meeting. He was supportive. He might redirect a little bit if I was not going in the right direction, but he would do it carefully so as not to make me feel undermined or anything. But he would always be very clear to pick it up afterwards to give me that feedback, which is the best of both worlds.
I want to get into the insight side of life. You talked before about planning, and actually it was a course with Rory Sullivan that led you down the planning route and finding your insights passion. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
When I was in advertising planning, I was in the Interpublic group, and they sent me on a course with Rory Sutherland. This was 25 years ago on how to be a great planner, how to be a great strategic thinker. I mean, God, you probably pay billions for it these days. In those days, it was part of whatever the Interpublic group offered. I'm very lucky I got in 25 years ago on a cheap deal in order to be taught and mentored by Rory. He's such an amazing thinker. A couple of things that really stood out for me from a work perspective, content of work. That was probably one of the most formative things that I ever did because he was the one who really opened my eyes to the fact that why I joined advertising and planning in the first place is because I wanted to have impact. I wanted to understand why people did things and I wanted to help impact that, nudge that in the right direction. What Rory really opened my eyes to was recognizing that you need to get under the skin of really what's driving behavior. He was probably one of the first who introduced me to the concept of system 1, system 2 thinking and the idea that most of our behavior behavior is not conscious, is not thought through. It's triggered by all of these things that we're not even conscious of, not really aware of. It was the real moment of recognizing the industry I was in, and this is no disrespect to advertising. Some of my best friends are in advertising, but it just, for me, the industry I was in, it was always the hammer in search of the nail, because whatever the problem was, advertising was the answer. And I remember at the time I was doing this course with Rory, one of the things that I was working on was trying to get people to sign up for UK apprenticeships. And we did this big campaign, which I thought was really good, and it fell flat on its face in terms of impact. And I remember everyone was celebrating the campaign, talking how great it was, and I was looking at the telephone rates in the days when you had to phone somebody. I mean, I don't even think there was a website for this. You had to phone up in order to register your interest. And I remember looking at it, and I was like, guys, the phone-in number rates have barely changed since we ran the campaign. Oh, no, but it was a great campaign. Well, it can't be a great campaign because actually behavior hasn't changed. I think doing that in line with this course with Rory, I was like, I think I'm in the wrong place, because the thing that really makes me passionate isn't necessarily going to be, the itch isn't going to be scratched by necessarily by this job. I learned so much. In fact, I still have my notes somewhere from that course 25 years ago, because I learned so much in that time about drivers of human behavior that essentially that sent me off to more of a strategic planning route, where I had a little bit more freedom about how we solve for the human behavioral challenge or opportunity that we'd identified. So certainly Rory has, I'm sure, no idea that I have him to thank for that. But it was definitely him, that moment, that was that ripple effect. And back to what we've talked about through this, if that ripple effect continuing. I'm not sure this is something I've been totally conscious of. I was talking about with somebody the other day, which is, I do think it's one of those things that subconsciously I've carried with me through my career, particularly working in corporate life, where people are like, we need to restage the brand, we need to do this, we need to act. And I've always been keen to be the one who's like, sure, but to what end? What is the behavior today? What is the behavior that you want in future? And unless you really understand what's causing the behavior today and what it will take to nudge a consumer to do something differently, a consumer to choose, a consumer to stop smoking, or whatever the thing is, the behavior is that you want to change, then there's no point even working out, because the thing you may be creating may not at all solve the problem that you're trying to address in the first place. I can't say that I'm a deep behavioral scientist bringing that simple set of questions to everything that you do, internally and externally. And I'd say that is just as important, because I would say some of the, you and I have seen this, right? Some of the change initiatives that happen in organizations fail because fundamentally whoever advised them don't understand how human beings work, don't understand the behavioral change wheel of how you get people to nudge their behavior in the right direction.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Your career has been about understanding complex consumer behavior, how to change that and how to influence that. But also you're doing that with change management as well, aren't you, internally?
Correct, yeah. To begin with in my career, I probably spent most of my time thinking about how to influence outside, how to influence consumers. I think, particularly in a corporate job, the more senior I became, the more, and the teams that I was managing and the complex cross-functional dynamics that I was working with, you realize that actually you're spending less time doing that, but actually you need to apply those skills internally, because the people, to get your job done and to successfully get the function going in the right direction, you actually have to spend more of your time trying to work out how do you nudge the behaviors of your cross-functional colleagues, how do you nudge the behaviors of your team. It is amazing to me how many change management initiatives internally are about structure and frameworks and blah, 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 productivity and blah, 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 blah. But then fundamentally miss the point of, they make people aware of change, and they theoretically put in frameworks and structures, but there's very little thought about how change is going to actually happen and what specific behaviors need to change and how are you going to make those behaviors change. It's just like, here's a new org structure, make it happen. Or here's a new way of working. I remember...
Well, they fundamentally miss the who, don't they? They miss the
who.
Yeah,
totally.
Who is this going to impact? And in what way? And how
and
do
in
we
what
help
way?
them and convince them that it is needed?
Right. And how do you help them with that change? And how do you make it rewarding? And basically how to complete the cycle? I think a lot of change management projects get stuck at awareness and the basics of a framework, and then basically wonder why change doesn't happen. And it's because, to your point, they've not thought about who they're trying to influence. They've not thought about what behavior they're trying to change, really, but like day-to-day behavior. They've not thought about how do they make it easy and rewarding for people to change their behavior, because let's be honest, most of us human beings, our default is to resist change or to block it or slow it because it's emotionally, physically stressful and time-consuming consuming, etc., to change. But it's amazing how many change management projects fail, just don't make the progress that they expect because they haven't really understood who they're trying to influence.
Exactly. And taking that complex thinking into something that can actually drive action within an organization is often completely missed. So let's talk about insights and the ripple impact of incredible insights. Like obviously you and I have been in insights for decades, and you've led so many different teams and brands and organizations through big initiatives. But sometimes insights come in the small spaces, right? They come in the more visceral consumer truths and those little moments in qual or otherwise where you go, ooh, like there's something really here. Do you have any of those stories of those ripple impacts with insights where they're just what I would call unignorable insights, and they can sometimes be so teeny tiny and small but actually naturally create a lot of momentum?
There are a few I can think of, and you're right. It's funny that whenever we teach about insights, you always talk about the big stuff, right? Talk about the big campaigns, the big positionings, big innovation. And yet, in my experience, sometimes some of the most profound insights are the small things, and particularly sometimes with qualitative research, there are things that even nobody says, but you just you get a feeling from things like body language, right, about how people react. There's one thing I'll remember when we were both at Pepsi, and I was working on a restage of Pepsi Next, which for those people who don't remember, you and I know probably very well, was this mid-calorie color idea. And logically, whenever we tested it quantitatively, people are like, yeah, no, it makes sense. I mean, it tastes almost like the real thing and it's half the calories. Totally logical. I remember being in a focus group in the days when we did focus groups, an in-person focus group in New Jersey or somewhere like that. I remember we shared the concept with people. And what I remember is the pause before people answered. You could see on people's faces there's the thought process of, well, I guess I think I should like this, but I'm not sure I do like this. And I remember the moderator asked them, so is this something that you would buy? And you just saw people pause, and I was like, that's it. That's the problem. That's the problem with this concept. And indeed, as we saw, the challenge is it sounds good on paper, but in reality, there aren't that many people who really want something that's halfway between two other things which satisfy their need better. In between, no one, right, exactly, falls between two stools. While logically it made so much sense, that was an example where the human behavioral reaction to that concept, that pausing and humming and hawing and, yeah, I mean, it sounds like a good idea. You realize that actually there is something that isn't really working here for people. That was a really good lesson in when you are looking for an insight and looking for a unlock. It isn't just about going and doing as much quant as you can. You need to go and hear people talking about it. You need to see their reaction. You need to look at their body language. You need to get more texture because some things they just don't work on paper. They don't work in a quant survey. You need to feel it in order to feel if there's an idea there.
Yeah, you were talking about listening to the pause, and that's deep listening, because that's not just listening, but listening to what is not being said, watching the body language. In fact, we've got a body language expert coming on next week, which is really exciting. But watching what is happening and deeply listening and not going into research to prove a decision you've actually already made. I've seen that time and time again. It's the worst research. If you've made the decision, save your money, just carry on and then iterate as is needed. If you've already made the choice, just go. Don't go into research to prove a point. Like, what's the point in that? You might as well carry on.
Right.
But really genuinely going to learn and to observe and to get to the truth and to get to those human moments. I mean, we talked about human leadership earlier, but also human insights. Insights has almost forgotten what it's about. Like, it's become so obsessed with process and analytics and big data and structure and answers very quickly. And that's great. But sometimes we can lose our way to forget what are we actually here to do is to inspire people and bring learning and intuition and observation into an organization, to bring the consumer in and all those wonderful analogies. Sometimes I think we forget that, and insights becomes a bit like the marketing police.
Completely. And where insights defines itself as a series of stage gates and barriers to poor decisions, its impact is going to be limited, and it's going to be a very unsatisfying role for it to play, to be totally honest. And yet I see in still quite a number of teams that is the space that they are stuck in, is in that role. And that's not rewarding for anybody. I see in the most impactful insights teams, they sit on a ton of incredible data, but it's the interpretation of that data I don't think any of us should be scared by AI, certainly from what I see.
No,
I think
no.
it'll be an incredible tool for us and can be an incredible tool
Mhm.
for us to augment us. But I still think the human intelligence, the human oversight, the human interpretation is going to be incredibly important. And that role that we can play is still going to be enormously important. On top of that, how do you then translate that into action in the business? Because you know what, the AI at the end of the day is just, at the very best, something you can delegate to get things done efficiently, or a thought partner.
Mhm.
At the end of the day, you have to go and sell that to the business. You have to go and
Yeah,
tell the
absolutely.
business why it needs to act differently in order to get the outcome that it wants. And that
Mhm.
takes you. I think in future, our skills will be less about being, possibly even less about being researchers, as in executing
Yeah.
research and the process and the execution of analytics. Don't get me wrong, I think we need solid fundamentals there, but I don't think as much of our time will be on that. More of our time will be on commercial acumen, so really understanding how the business operates in order to shape what we're trying to solve for. And then to your point is adding the human interpretation and analysis to then connect, what does this really mean? What's really going on with human behavior? And then what does the business need to go and do? That's where we can add so much value. It's that human interpretation, human oversight, human activation of what we're
Yeah,
learning.
I love that. Human activation. We should talk about that more. We don't have the time. Oh my gosh. We should have just done a personal one and then done an insight one so that we could have like, all the richness. So you and I are quite biased in this, right? Because you and I have been in the world of insights for decades. Like me, you're deeply passionate about it, and it's something that you love as much as I do.
Mm-hmm.
But I feel that there's a lot of people that don't really understand the power of insights, that haven't felt it. So there's fantastic examples where it's very embedded into the thinking, the strategy, the plans, the growth. But for organizations that might not have an insight team or haven't experienced it, how would you describe the power of insights within an organization to those people who haven't seen it and felt it and experienced it?
That's a good question. My old boss at Mondelez, Dirk, and I had this conversation about all companies basically sell to people. They sell to consumers, sell to shoppers, sell to customers, like they sell to clients. They sell to somebody, right? I assume in 99.9% of cases, they're selling to somebody. And I remember him saying to me, ultimately, any business, customer, consumer, shopper insights should be at the heart of the business, because fundamentally, you're trying to nudge a set of people to choose you, choose your brands, your services, your products, whatever the thing is that you're selling. You try to nudge them to choose you over the proliferation of other options that are out there. And quite honestly, I don't think it's any more complicated than that. Ultimately, a business is only as good, can only be as effective as its understanding of the people it's trying to reach. For me, the power of an insights team is they should be able to help bring that understanding of the people you're trying to reach, where they are today, where you would like them to be, the choices you would like them to make, and how you help them get from A to B. To me, it's no more complicated than that. Otherwise, what you're doing is you're acting, you're putting out advertising, innovation, promotion, digital advertising, whatever the thing may be that you're doing to try and reach those people. But you're just throwing it out into the ether in the hopes that that thing is going to be effective in driving the behavior that you want. The power of insights is about making sure that you are as effective and impactful as possible as reaching and converting those people that you're trying to reach.
I love that. So everyone needs an insight team.
Totally.
Amazing. So we're calling our guests the wave makers. What advice would you give to aspiring wave makers? So it could be someone at a crossroads, someone starting out in their career, someone looking to change something, or just thinks there's something bigger and better.
Such a great question. And I'm not sure I'm worthy of the title yet, but
You totally are.
I don't know. I think fundamentally, don't overthink it too much. If you've got a hunch about something, about a way things should be done differently, an opportunity, Malcolm Gladwell showed that, right? Is sometimes our hunches, not always, but sometimes our hunches are right, and we should try and follow our hunches whenever we can. There's insight in there. It's just we can't really see it right now. One of the things I would encourage people to do is think about the environments that they've really thrived in and really felt safe in, felt inspired by. Think about what are some of the characteristics of that you want to be able to pull forward. You know, we talked a lot about either ways that leaders have acted that we've loved or ways that leaders have acted that we didn't love. Take some of that and start to use that to almost create, what does your wave look like? What does your future ideal situation or scenario look like? And try and learn from that. I'm always amazed people have like a super clear vision from day one of what they want to do. Me, I'm probably more of I collect as I go along. I think through my career, I've collected things that I did and I didn't like, and I've used that to create my vision, I think, of what a good leader could look like.
But incredible though, right? Because you get to cherry pick the best of the
Yeah.
best. You experience the best, you experience the worst, and you learn the lessons, and you get to cherry pick that from all your different experiences and organizations and teams and bosses. Like, how beautiful is that?
And the reality knowing that you'll never find something or somewhere or somebody that will be 100% perfect, right? Your aim isn't to imitate something, it's to create your own patchwork quilt, effectively, to use a terrible 1990s analogy or 1980s film analogy, but it's to create your own version of that by stitching together things that you've liked and enjoyed and been inspired by through your career.
I love that. So follow your passion and find your way. Beautiful. Final words for our final question. Nick Graham, thank you so much for opening up your story to us with such clarity, with such courage, and with such heart, such beautiful stories. So thank you so much. From classroom emotional impact to being in the boardrooms. No, I mean, it's just beautiful stories and life lessons for us all. Your ripple moments remind us that the smallest comments made by an inspiring mentor can change someone's world and actually change someone's career. So thank you so much. That's a wrap on this Ripple episode. Tune in weekly for more bold voices and inspiring wave makers. I'm Laura Barber. This is the Ripple Impact. See you next week. Nick, thank you so much. It's been incredible as always.
Good to see you again. Thank you.
And you. Thanks, Nick. Thanks, everyone. See you next week.